What if I told you that Zambia was never really in control of its own destiny? That behind the scenes, secret deals linked to Edgar Lungu's family tied the country directly to Washington and London's hidden power games? From backroom negotiations to billion-dollar debts, this is not just Zambia's story. It's about how Africa is being pulled into a global tug-of-war between East and West. Stay with us, because the truth behind this leaked deal will shock not just Zambia, but the world. Leaked deal exposed. Zambia's political battles are no longer just local. Hidden agreements involving former President Edgar Lungu's family have allegedly tied Zambia to the UK and US power agenda, putting Africa at the center of Washington and London's global chess game. In this documentary-style breakdown, we uncover how Lungu's family is linked to the West's hidden strategies, why Zambia's economy and debt crisis became a tool of foreign control, how President Hakainde Hichilema (HH) is navigating between China, the UK, and the US, what this means for Africa's independence in the face of global power struggles. This isn't just about Zambia, it's about how the UK and US quietly shape Africa's future. Subscribe to InspirAfrica Official for more deep investigations into Africa's politics, global power, and hidden agendas. The Hidden Zambia Deal. Zambia, a landlocked nation in southern Africa, has long been a focal point for global economic and geopolitical interests due to its vast copper reserves, strategic location, and historical ties to both Western and Eastern powers. The concept of a Hidden Zambia Deal refers to alleged secret negotiations, agreements, or financial arrangements involving Zambian political elites, foreign governments, and international financial institutions. Such deals, often shrouded in secrecy, are speculated to influence Zambia's economic policies, resource management, and political sovereignty. The phrase evokes questions about transparency, national autonomy, and the interplay of global powers in shaping Zambia's destiny. This analysis explores the alleged secret negotiations involving Edgar Lungu's family, the geopolitical roles of Washington and London, Zambia's debt crisis, President Hakainde Hichilema's delicate balancing act between East and West, and the broader implications for Africa's struggle for independence versus external influence. By examining these elements, we aim to uncover what such a leaked deal might mean for Zambia and its place in the global order. Edgar Lungu's family and secret negotiations. Edgar Lungu's presidency and influence, 2015 to 2021. Edgar Lungu, Zambia's sixth president, led the country from January 2015 to August 2021 under the Patriotic Front (PF) party. His tenure was marked by economic challenges, including rising national debt, declining copper prices, and accusations of mismanagement and corruption. Lungu's administration deepened Zambia's ties with China through infrastructure loans, but it also faced criticism for authoritarian tendencies, including restricting opposition voices and media freedom. Lungu's family, particularly his wife Esther and children, have been subjects of public scrutiny regarding their wealth and influence. Allegations of secret negotiations involving Lungu's family often center on claims that they benefited from state contracts, offshore accounts, or illicit deals tied to Zambia's resource wealth, particularly copper. While no definitive evidence of a specific hidden deal involving Lungu's family has been universally substantiated, the narrative persists in Zambian political discourse, fueled by opposition rhetoric and media speculation. The nature of alleged secret negotiations. Secret negotiations in this context likely refer to non-transparent agreements involving foreign entities, governments, corporations, or financial institutions that may have enriched Lungu's inner circle. For instance, during Lungu's presidency, Zambia secured significant loans from Chinese state-owned enterprises for infrastructure projects like roads, airports, and power plants. These deals, while publicly announced, often lacked transparency regarding terms, repayment schedules, or collateral arrangements. Critics allege that Lungu's family or close associates may have received kickbacks or preferential contracts tied to these loans. Additionally, Lungu's administration engaged with the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and Western creditors, particularly after Zambia's debt crisis deepened in 2020, when the country defaulted on a $42.5 million Eurobond payment, becoming the first African nation to default during the COVID-19 pandemic. Speculation about secret negotiations often points to behind-the-scenes discussions with creditors to restructure debt or secure bailouts, potentially involving concessions like asset sales or policy reforms that favored foreign interests. Evidence and speculation. While concrete evidence of Lungu's family directly engaging in secret deals is scarce, several high-profile cases fuel suspicion. For example, investigations by Zambian anti-corruption agencies and international watchdogs have probed contracts awarded to companies linked to Lungu's associates. In 2021, the Financial Intelligence Center (FIC) in Zambia reported suspicious transactions involving politically exposed persons, though specific names were not disclosed publicly. Esther Lungu, in particular, has faced allegations of amassing wealth through questionable means, including properties in Lusaka and abroad. The lack of transparency in Zambia's debt agreements with China, particularly through the Export-Import Bank of China, China EXIM Bank, has also raised questions. For instance, reports suggested that some Chinese loans were tied to copper mining concessions, potentially benefiting elites close to Lungu. However, without leaked documents or whistleblower accounts, these remain remain speculative. Political context. Lungu's defeat in the 2021 election to Hakainde Hichilema was partly attributed to public discontent over economic mismanagement and corruption allegations. The narrative of secret negotiations involving Lungu's family serves as a political weapon for the current administration and opposition groups to discredit the PF. However, such claims must be approached cautiously, as they risk being politicized exaggerations in Zambia's polarized political landscape. Washington and London's shadow role. Historical context of Western influence in Zambia. Zambia's relationship with Western powers, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, dates back to its independence from British colonial rule in 1964. As a former British colony, Zambia maintains strong economic ties with London, particularly through the mining sector, with companies like Anglo-American playing significant roles. Washington's influence grew during the Cold War as the U.S. sought to counter Soviet and Chinese influence in Africa. Under Lungu, Zambia's pivot toward China strained relations with Western capitals, which viewed Chinese loans as a threat to their influence and Zambia's fiscal stability. The shadow role of Washington and London likely refers to their efforts to influence Zambia's economic policies through diplomatic pressure, financial aid, or conditional lending via institutions like the IMF and World Bank. The IMF and Western leverage. The IMF has been a central player in Zambia's debt crisis. During Lungu's presidency, Zambia sought IMF support to address its fiscal challenges, but faced resistance due to concerns over governance and unsustainable borrowing. The IMF's conditions for loans typically include austerity measures, transparency reforms, and privatization, which align with Western economic interests. Washington and London, as major IMF shareholders, wield significant influence over its lending decisions, indirectly shaping Zambia's policy choices. For example, in 2020, as Zambia teetered on the brink of default, the IMF withheld a bailout package, citing inadequate fiscal reforms. Critics argue this was a strategic move by Western powers to pressure Lungu's government into reducing Chinese influence and aligning with Western priorities. The shadow role may also involve intelligence sharing, diplomatic backchannels, or support for anti-Lungu political forces to shift Zambia's geopolitical alignment. London's mining interests. London's role is particularly tied to Zambia's copper industry, a cornerstone of its economy. British firms, alongside multinationals like Glencore and Vedanta, operate major mines in Zambia's copperbelt. Allegations of secret negotiations often point to Western efforts to secure favorable mining contracts or block Chinese competitors. For instance, disputes over the Konkola copper mines, KCM, owned by Vedanta, saw Lungu's government attempt to liquidate the company in 2019, prompting accusations of political interference to favor local elites or Chinese investors. Washington's geopolitical strategy. The U.S. has increasingly viewed Zambia as a battleground in its rivalry with China. Through initiatives like the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, Washington has sought to counter Chinese infrastructure investments with its own financing. The shadow role may involve covert support for pro-Western political actors, including Hichilema, who campaigned on a platform of economic reform and transparency, aligning with U.S. and UK priorities. Speculative elements. The notion of a hidden deal involving Washington and London could imply covert agreements to influence Zambia's debt restructuring or resource management. For example, Western creditors may have pushed for debt-for-equity swaps, where Zambia's assets, e.g., mines or infrastructure, are exchanged for debt relief. Such arrangements, if kept secret, could fuel perceptions of neo-colonialism, as Zambia's sovereignty is compromised to appease Western interests. How Zambia's debt ties into global control. Zambia's debt crisis. Origins and scope. Zambia's debt crisis is central to understanding its vulnerability to global control. By 2020, Zambia's external debt reached approximately $12 billion, with significant portions owed to China, $3 to $4 billion, Eurobond holders, $3 billion, and multilateral institutions like the IMF and World Bank. The reliance on copper exports, which account for over 70% of Zambia's foreign exchange earnings, makes the economy susceptible to global commodity price fluctuations. Under Lungu, Zambia borrowed heavily from China for infrastructure projects, including the Kenneth Kaunda International Airport upgrade and the Kafue Gorge Lower Hydropower Project. These loans, often at commercial rates, came with opaque terms, raising concerns about debt traps. The 2020 Eurobond default highlighted Zambia's fiscal mismanagement and over-reliance on external borrowing. The IMF and debt restructuring. The IMF plays a pivotal role in Zambia's debt restructuring efforts. In December 2022, under Hichilema's administration, Zambia secured a $1.3 billion extended credit facility (ECF) from the IMF, contingent on austerity measures, fiscal transparency, and creditor negotiations. The IMF's involvement is not merely financial. It imposes policy conditions that align Zambia with Western economic models, such as privatization and reduced public spending. Critics argue that the IMF's conditions serve global control by prioritizing creditor interests over Zambia's development needs. For instance, austerity measures like fuel subsidy cuts have sparked public unrest, as seen in protests in 2023. The IMF's push for transparency also indirectly targets supports Chinese loans, which are less scrutinized than Western ones, aligning with Washington and London's geopolitical goals. China's role and the debt trap narrative. China's lending to Zambia has been framed in Western media as a debt trap, where loans are extended with the intent of seizing strategic assets upon default. While Zambia has not lost assets like ports or mines to China, unlike Sri Lanka's Hambantota port, fears persist that Chinese creditors could demand concessions such as mining rights or land. The opacity of Chinese loans fuels speculation about hidden clauses or secret negotiations, tying into the broader narrative of a hidden Zambia deal. Global control dynamics. Zambia's debt crisis exemplifies how global powers exert control over developing nations. Western institutions like the IMF and World Bank use debt relief as leverage to enforce neoliberal policies, while China offers loans with fewer governance conditions but potential strategic strings attached. This creates a tug-of-war where Zambia's sovereignty is eroded by competing external agendas. For example, debt restructuring negotiations under the G20's common framework involve both Western and Chinese creditors, who often have conflicting priorities. Western creditors push for transparency and equal treatment, while China prefers bilateral deals, potentially giving it leverage over Zambia's resources. This dynamic places Zambia at the mercy of global financial systems, limiting its ability to pursue independent economic policies. Hakainde Hichilema's dilemma between East and West. Hichilema's rise and economic agenda. Hakainde Hichilema, elected in August 2021, campaigned on a platform of economic recovery, anti-corruption, and transparency. His United Party for National Development (UPND) promised to address Zambia's debt crisis, restore investor confidence, and diversify the economy away from copper dependence. Hichilema's pro-business stance and Western education, he studied economics in the UK, made him a favorite among Western capitals, positioning him as a counterweight to Lungu's China-leaning policies. Balancing East and West. Hichilema faces a delicate balancing act between Eastern and Western powers. On one hand, he seeks to maintain Zambia's relationship with China, a major trading partner and creditor. China's investments in mining and infrastructure remain critical, and Hichilema has avoided overtly antagonizing Beijing. For instance, in 2022, he met with Chinese officials to reassure them of Zambia's commitment to honoring existing agreements. On the other hand, Hichilema's reliance on the IMF and Western support for debt restructuring aligns him with Washington and London. The IMF's $1.3 billion loan and subsequent creditor negotiations require Zambia to adopt policies that may conflict with Chinese interests, such as greater transparency in loan agreements. This creates a dilemma. Aligning too closely with the West risks alienating China, while leaning toward Beijing could jeopardize IMF support and Western investment. Domestic challenges. Hichilema's economic reforms, including austerity measures mandated by the IMF, have sparked domestic backlash. Rising fuel and food prices have fueled protests, with critics accusing Hichilema of prioritizing foreign creditors over Zambian citizens. The legacy of Lungu's administration, including entrenched corruption and public distrust, complicates Hichilema's ability to implement reforms without appearing beholden to external powers. Geopolitical tightrope. Hichilema's foreign policy reflects this balancing act. He has courted Western investment through initiatives like the US-Africa Business Summit and UK trade partnerships, while maintaining diplomatic ties with China. For example, in 2023, Zambia hosted Chinese firms for mining expos, signaling continued cooperation. However, Hichilema's anti-corruption drive, including probes into Lungu-era contracts, indirectly targets Chinese-linked deals, aligning with Western demands for transparency. The hidden Zambia deal narrative could complicate Hichilema's position. If evidence of secret negotiations under Lungu emerges, it might bolster Hichilema's anti-corruption credentials, but also pressure him to renegotiate Chinese contracts, risking Beijing's ire. Conversely, ignoring such allegations could undermine his domestic support base, which expects accountability. Africa's bigger struggle: independence versus influence. Historical context. Africa's struggle for independence versus external influence is a recurring theme in its post-colonial history. From European colonialism to Cold War proxy battles, African nations have navigated competing global powers seeking to control their resources, markets, and political systems. Zambia, with its copper wealth and strategic location, exemplifies this struggle. Modern dynamics. Today, Africa faces a new form of influence through economic dependencies. China's Belt and Road Initiative (BRI) has poured billions into African infrastructure, offering an alternative to Western aid but raising concerns about debt sustainability. Meanwhile, Western institutions like the IMF and World Bank continue to shape African economies through conditional lending, often prioritizing creditor interests over local needs. Zambia's experience reflects this broader dynamic. Its debt crisis, Chinese loans, and IMF negotiations highlight how African nations are caught between competing powers. Independence, in this context, means the ability to pursue policies that prioritize national interests over foreign agendas, but economic realities often force compromises. Zambia as a case study. Zambia's copper reserves make it a prize for global powers. China seeks access to raw materials for its industrial needs, while Western firms aim aim to maintain dominance in global mining markets. The IMF's role as a gatekeeper of debt relief gives Western powers leverage to influence Zambia's policies, while China's bilateral loans offer flexibility but potential long-term risks. This struggle is not unique to Zambia. Across Africa, countries like Kenya, Ethiopia, and Angola face similar challenges, balancing Chinese investment with Western demands. The hidden Zambia deal narrative underscores fears that African sovereignty is undermined by opaque agreements, whether with Beijing, Washington, or multilateral institutions. Pathways to independence. Achieving true independence requires African nations to diversify their economies, reduce debt dependency, and strengthen governance. For Zambia, this means investing in agriculture, renewable energy, and manufacturing to reduce reliance on copper exports. Regional cooperation, such as through the African Continental Free Trade Area (AFCFTA), could also enhance economic autonomy by fostering intra-African trade. However, internal challenges like corruption, political instability, and weak institutions hinder these efforts. Zambia's polarized politics, exemplified by Lungu-Hichilema tensions, complicate unified national strategies. External powers exploit these divisions, offering aid or loans in exchange for influence. Conclusion: what the leaked deal means for Zambia. The concept of a leaked deal remains speculative without concrete evidence, but its implications are profound. If such a deal exists, involving Lungu's family, foreign powers, or hidden debt terms, it could confirm suspicions of elite capture and external control, eroding public trust in Zambia's governance. For Hichilema, addressing these allegations is a double-edged sword. Exposing Lungu-era corruption could strengthen his mandate but risks destabilizing relations with China or other creditors. For Zambia, the broader lesson is the need for transparency and accountability in international dealings. Opaque agreements, whether with China, the IMF, or Western powers, undermine sovereignty and perpetuate dependency. A leaked deal could galvanize public demand for reforms, such as stronger anti-corruption measures or debt transparency laws, but it could also deepen political divisions if mishandled. Globally, the hidden Zambia deal reflects the ongoing struggle for control over Africa's resources and future. Zambia's experience serves as a warning to other African nations. Without economic diversification and robust governance, the continent risks remaining a pawn in great power rivalries. For Hichilema, navigating this landscape requires pragmatism, balancing domestic expectations with the realities of global finance and geopolitics.